Hello chess friends and welcome to the Out of Chess channel and welcome to a spectacular game that I prepared for you today. We have here Lc0 versus Stockfish 15 in the TCEC season 23 competition that's going on now in this beautiful super final. But today's specialty will be the most brutal, the 4-pawn attack against the King's Indian defense. And this is quite a spectacular opening. I'm a King's Indian player. I know what I'm talking about. The 4-pawn attack is such a double-edged opening. There are so many great games that are won by white, but there are also spectacular games by black. It's really a wild opening, but in my opinion a perfect opening for these two top engines because Lc0 and of course Stockfish 15 are really tactical beasts. So this game is of course really again a beautiful tactical battle, really tactical struggle between the two top engines, Lc0 and Stockfish 15. So let's see now how Stockfish handles Lc0's 4-pawn attack. So d4 was the first move by Lila. We have knight to f6, c4, g6, knight to c3, bishop to g7, e4. The King's Indian is on the board. So we have now the move d6. It's a necessary move because e5 would have been the positional threat by white, and now comes this brutal f4 move immediately. And many things can go wrong in this opening because okay, white has a really dominant position now in the center of the board. White is storming with the pawns towards you, but the lack of development I think is also a problem of white that bothered me when I play maybe against the King's Indian. I would not play the 4-pawn attacks. You have to still play once with the bishop, twice maybe with the knight, and then in the third move you can maybe escape with your king. So that's why okay, you have your fun with your pawns, but then black is actually breaking your pawn storm by pushing some pawns. First of all, what black needs to do is of course break the pawn chain with the move c5, and there are no of course two choices what black can do, or maybe even that white can do, maybe even three choices. White can of course compete for the center with knight to f3, knight to d4, or can advance the pawn to d5, or maybe can take the pawn on c5. d takes c5 in my opinion would be very risky for white. White should not do that because actually what black should do here is simply kingside castle, get out of the attack, and now after something like c takes d6, okay, you lost the pawn here from black's perspective, but as I said in the beginning, the lack of development is now a tactical problem of white's. We can play e takes d6. You can try now maybe to develop finally your pieces, but it's a little bit too slow. Rook to e8 is going to happen again, knight to f3, but now we can even play some ideas of knight to e4, or maybe even bishop to f5 is immediately an opportunity because we'll simply continue the pressure here around square e4, knight to c6, bishop to c3 are opportunities. So I think the activity that black gains here for the lost pawn is really beautiful, and eventually we'll take out back our pawn, so it's not that black will lose some material in the early stage of the game. So that's why after move c5, after d takes c5, you can even play this line, queen to a5, knight to e4 is also very nice. So that's why white many times advances simply the pawn to d5. Black should now castle and secure the king by playing this move, and now bishop to e2. Here, black should again continue to break the pawn chain. In the beginning, we have played the move c5. We have to further challenge white center control because we don't tolerate this 4 pawns. We should break them. So that's why now the next move should be really the move e6 here by Stockfish 15, and Stockfish of course plays it. So now again, white has two choices. Here in the continuation, d takes e6 was played. You can of course also play the move knight to f3, but then it leads, I think, into a very complicated line that I played many times from black's perspective. I lost many games, but I also have to say I won many games. Now of course e takes d5 is the continuation by black. Now now c takes d5 should be the continuation of white, and actually what happens now in this scenario is a very nice gambit line of white, and it's really hard to play this game because there are so many tactical sequences that can happen to you. There are so many wild ideas in the opening stage. Now black is continuing of course with rook to e8. White advances the pawn on e5, and it seems so that this is maybe wrong what white is doing, but actually I guarantee you have an uncomfortable game here from black's perspective. d takes e5, f takes e5, knight to g4, attacking now the pawn on e5, and actually after e6, f takes e6, d6 is going to happen, and now as I said, this is really hard to play. Bishop to f4 is going to happen, kingside castling, so many opportunities are here also for white. Bishop to b5 is one of the opportunities. Knight to b5, knight to c7 are opportunities. So as I said, it's a double-edged line. So But after move d takes e6, so here knight to f3 was not the move that Lila c0 played. We have d takes e6, now we have f takes e6, and actually, okay, black is here a really flexible pawn structure, but we have to say that the d6 is a little bit weak. What we're trying to do now from black perspective, we are trying to advance the pawn with the move d5. This is now our key goal, this is now our key motif. Here we're trying to break and enter with the move d5. When that happens, I think black could have a solid game. So now Lila c0 launches a brutal move g4, is storming simply towards the king side also now with this move. In the continuation, Stockfish plays normal development with the move knight to c6, and here Lila c0 sensed that Lila could have some problems with queen to h4, so that's why you want to have this knight that could protect you, maybe with the move knight to f2. Look, for instance, what happens if you try to play bishop to e3. Bishop to e3 is in some occasions a very necessary move here, because you're trying to control further the d4 square, because in this particular position we have to agree the d4 square is a vulnerable square, so that's why you want to further protect it, maybe with bishop to e3, knight to f3. Then the game becomes quite spectacular. Then actually this d5 goal is working. That's the beauty about here Stockfish opening preparation. We have c takes d5, e takes d5, and look at this. Even if you advance maybe the pawn now to e5, there is this stunning tactic with knight to g4, bishop to g4, queen to h4, and now we pick up simply the bishop, and the game should be much better here for black. So as I said, this is not working. What you could do is maybe here to take e takes d5 instead of e5, but now with knight to d4 we can actually occupy the center of the board. Bishop to d4, c takes d4, and the problem is now you cannot pick up the pawn on d4, because again you get this tactical shot, knight to g4, discovered attack by the bishop against the queen. So again, an uncomfortable game here for white for sure. So that's why here knight to h3 was played, so no bishop to e3 ideas. I'm talking about this bishop to e3 idea because now you see, because white didn't battle for the d4 square, Stockfish is saying I will occupy the square d4 immediately. So you didn't battle for it, now I'll simply occupy it, because knight to f3 was of course not an opportunity, because then you lose the connection between the bishop and the pawn, and then black simply picks up the pawn on g4. So knight to d4, really a beautiful square for the knight. Now we can play around this knight. This is now sort of a cornerstone, really a build-up attack from the square d4. Now of course we can also maneuver the knight on e7, support further the d4 square by our powerful dark square bishop. So in the continuation, we have now knight to f2, a6. Stockfish is now continuing the pressure here with the idea of playing maybe the move b5, kingside castling, and now a beautiful move here by Stockfish 15, g5. There is a rule in chess that says whenever you face a pawn storm, and we can agree this is a pawn storm, we have here 3 connected pawns that are quite annoying to handle. There is a defensive strategy. We can really talk about how to break the pawn storm. One of the main ideas is to split the pawn chain. So for instance, we're trying to deflect one of these pawns from the chain. So we're trying to maybe create this kind of a structure where now suddenly there are not 3 pawns, or we are trying to block the pawn chain. For instance, if you play f5, we can maybe advance the pawn on e5, and now we have solved many problems, because this structure is not so dynamic anymore, because you have already advanced the pawn. So as I said, when you face a pawn storm, think about these 2 defensive strategies: split the pawn chain or stop the pawn chain. That are your main attacking goals. So here Stockfish tried this idea to break the pawn chain with the move g5, although it's a temporarily pawn sacrifice. But look what happens, for instance, after f takes g5, now we can play knight to d7. Seems beautiful, and look at this, we can from this square use the beautiful e5 square, and we have again 2 powerful knights that are dancing in the center of the board. Look at this, you can maybe try again bishop to e3, but now knight to e5 is pretty hard to defend. Knight to f3 will happen in the near future. Even if you take, of course, this is not working because you get this kind of a tactic, the fork discovered attack also by the bishop, so it's not working. So you still have a good control around the square d4. So that's why after move g5, here Lila c0 tried to play the move f5, but we have to say this is not a dynamic pawn structure anymore. Stockfish blocked now the further progress by this pawn storm, and Stockfish retreats simply to d7, again using this e5 square because now Lila c0 has advanced the pawn. So in the continuation we have bishop to e3, again this motif, knight to e3, knight to e5, we have seen bishop to d4, c takes d4, queen to d4 is not working because of this tactical shot on knight to f3. So king to h1, Stockfish, pardon me, Lila c0 gets out of the range, and now b5. Look at this. This is really beautiful what Stockfish is doing. Okay, maybe you have solved some tactical problems because we have seen knight to f3 would be the serious threat, but now the bishop is coming on b7, and look at this. This is quite remarkable. What Stockfish is doing is trying to open out the long diagonal against the king on h1. So you have solved maybe one problem, but now a new problem is happening in the position. So we have now c takes b5. Okay, Stockfish is of course getting here maybe some problems on the queen side, is sacrificing a pawn, but Stockfish simply takes. Knight takes e2 makes really sense because after queen to e2 we got rid of the key defender on light squares, which was of course the light square bishop. Now you see this diagonal becomes now huge tactical problem in white's position. So bishop to b7, we have now a4, we have queen to e7, normal development of the queen, we have b takes a6, and now bishop to a6. Also rook to a6, here is an opportunity to maybe stay with this bishop on this long diagonal, but now after bishop to a6, knight to b5 is a must move because both of these pieces are lined up on the light square diagonal, so now the rook would be hanging. So that's why knight to b5, we have e takes f5, g takes f5, and now comes a brutal move by Stockfish, rook to f5. Look, this is really stunning. You cannot take the rook. Lila c0 didn't take the rook, but let's see now what happens if you take out the rook with e takes f5, bishop to b7. We are creating the check, and actually in this scenario white needs now to give up the knight. You have to create some escape routes for the king. The knight was standing in the way of this potential escape path, and now after move knight to e4, we pick up here the knight. You can maybe escape. Knight to f3 is not a possibility anymore, but now we just retreat to b7. We'll play maybe queen to d7, queen to c6, lining up here a beautiful queen and bishop battery on this long diagonal. So I would not love to play the game anymore from white's perspective. So you see, you have to sacrifice the knight. If you play, for instance, king to g1 instead of knight to e4, then knight to f3 is working immediately. You have only this square, king to g2, and now with knight to d4, discovered check, but also attack against the queen, so you lose decisive material. The game is over. So this is not working. So see, rook to f5 was played by Stockfish 15, really wild stuff. Rook to g1, rook to f7, retreating now with the rook, bishop to g5, attacking the queen, queen to e6. Now Stockfish is still trying to attack the light squares because Lila c0 doesn't have the light square bishop, and we have talked about the problems now on light square, so it's a brilliant idea. We have now rook to d1, attacking now the pawn on d6, but now a beautiful move, rook to f8, including now all of the pieces in the attack, and now also the knight on f2 is a vulnerable piece. So we have now rook to f2, rook to g2, pardon me, protecting the knight on f2, and now queen to b3. This is really important move because the problem is now you don't have time to pick up here the pawn on d6. You would love to, of course, to take out the backward pawn. We have to say it's a structural weakness in black's position, the backward pawn, but it's not working because queen to a4 is going to happen, and there's not a good way anymore to protect your piece. The piece is hanging, the piece is pinned here to the queen, so now you have to maybe give up your rook for the bishop, and still it's a much better position now for black, of course. So that's why after move queen to b3, sorry about that. So let's go back. So after queen to b3 that Lila c0 played here, pardon me, queen to e3 has to be played now by Lila c0, getting out of the range of the light square bishop, which was really devastating. Now Stockfish plays simply queen to a4 anyway, takes out this very important pawn. We have now knight to c3, queen to c2 again by Stockfish 15, knight to h3, trying to simplify the game, but Stockfish plays this beautiful tactical sequence, rook to f1, simplifies the game now enough, I think, because Stockfish sensed here, Stockfish is of course not saying anything, Stockfish is calculating, but Stockfish is calculating that actually with the bishop pair, with this weak b2 pawn, it's time now to reach the endgame stage. This was enough. We had this beautiful attack, but sometimes we cannot just play a really brilliant, attractive chess. Sometimes it's time to slow down the pace of the game. I think this is a perfect example how Stockfish goes now into a favorable endgame. After rook to f1, we have this one, knight to g1, rook to f2, rook takes f2, rook takes f2, and actually Lila has to compete now on the second rank. Stockfish picks up the rook. We have a couple of trades of pieces around the square d2, but now with knight to d3, you see Stockfish sensed that the b2 pawn is weak, and now it's of course a much better continuation. What you could do is maybe to play here the move b3 to try to get out of the range of the knight, but actually now with bishop to c3, this should be a much better position. Bishop to c3 and now bishop to b7, in my opinion, is simply winning the game. We just pick up the pawn and we'll have here two connected pawns in the center of the board. So this is not working. So that's why after move knight to d3, king to g2 was played by Lila c0. We have knight takes b2, and with the bishop pair, with an extra pawn on the queen side, this is now, in my opinion, completely winning endgame here for black. So knight to d5, knight to d3, knight to e2, bishop to b7, attacking the knight, knight to c3 again, king to f7. You have to use, of course, now your king in the continuation. We have bishop to g5, bishop to a6, bishop to d7, bishop to e5, cementing the bishop in the center of the board. We have now h4, bishop to bishop to f6, attacking the pawn. We have king to g3, knight to e5. We have here h5 by Lila c0, advancing the pawn. But when you push pawns in an endgame, these pawns can be also a weakness. So maybe you're creating some kind of a space advantage on the king side, but actually this could be quite a vulnerable pawn now in the continuation of the endgame. So knight to d7, we have king to f3, bishop to e5, knight to d5, knight to f6, knight to f6, and for king to f6, we have reached now this position where Stockfish has still the bishop pair on the board, has now also the opportunity to attack the light square pawns, because still these are vulnerable pieces, these are isolated pawns, which are of course objects that black can attack. So knight to c3, bishop to c4, we have king to g4, bishop to b3, knight to d5, bishop to d5, e takes d5, and it seems so that maybe white can hang on to this endgame, but actually here it's not so, because after king to e7, we have bishop to c1, c4. Stockfish starts to push now the pass pawn on the c file. We have king to g5, and now after bishop to d4, we have king to f5. Look what happens, for instance, if you play king to h6. This is quite remarkable. For instance, if you play king to h6, this will be a beautiful Zugzwang position. If you are familiar with the term Zugzwang, you're basically forcing your opponent to do a beautiful move. Now we play just king to f6. We're giving up the pawn on h7, but now we start to push the pawn here. You can also maybe try to push the pawn here on h6, but now we play king to f7, and notice now the king cannot play on h8, so the bishop is cutting off this very important square, and you have only the opportunity to play now with your bishop. Now we push the pawn further on c2. You are playing maybe this blockade idea with bishop to c1, but now we just play a move, and we're forcing now white to make a move. Maybe he can play something like bishop to e3, but now after bishop to b2, this is completely winning. In the next move, we'll promote the queen. White needs now to give up the bishop, and then eventually we can of course go for this pawn, but of course we can get this pawn and create a new passer, which is winning the game for black. So really nice endgame technique here by Stockfish 15. So in the game here, king to after bishop to d4, we have king to f5. So Lila didn't go for this pawn, which is of course also not working. We have seen now the sequence: king to f5, king to d7, we have king to e4, bishop to e5. Here we have this kind of motif. Stockfish is trying to get the king closer to the action. Now finally c3, we have bishop to e3, king to c4, and now Stockfish grabs another pawn, so it's again completely winning endgame here for black. So here, after a couple more moves, Stockfish advances now also the pawn further. We have here bishop to f8. Stockfish continues here with this idea, bishop to f4. You cannot take, of course, because the same motif will happen. We just push the pawn further. You can maybe stop the progress with a3, but now after bishop to c1, bishop to c1, bishop to c1, maybe this is this kind of a wrong bishop situation. But now actually with king to d3, Stockfish should go simply with the king towards the edge of the board. Maybe you can do this one, but now with bishop to e3, we can play here this kind of a move, king to f3, and notice now the king has to step back here to to the square e1. Now we pick up the pawn. You have to play king to f1. Now we play again this restriction idea. You have only one square, and now with king to g2, we are restricting the king's ability to escape maybe to the corner, because this is a wrong bishop position. If the king would be already on h1, then it actually would be a drawish position. But you see, with this restriction ideas, this is not working. Black has still a winning game here for himself. So that's why after bishop to f8, you see Stockfish play this idea bishop to f4. We have bishop to g7. We have bishop to e3, bishop to h8. Now Stockfish gets, of course, closer with the king. Again, a beautiful motif, c2. If you play, of course, king to c2, then we play king to e2, and there is now a clear path for our pawn. You have to now sacrifice the bishop again, but again with the same motif. Again, the king is too far away from the action, so there's no way that you can get this wrong bishop position where you place your king on h1. So here in the continuation, after c2, we have king to c4. We have a promotion. Now Stockfish simply pushed the pawn further. We have here this kind of idea, a bishop sacrifice. But now in this position, Lc0 resigned. Of course, there's only one move, king to b1. But now after queen to b2, this would be then a beautiful, beautiful checkmate. So a really stunning game, really brutal 4-pawn attack. You see how sharp this opening is. There are so many opportunities, so many sidelines. So you can, of course, study it further. In my opinion, this is really a double-edged opening, many opportunities for both sides. If you want to see more about the King's Indian and also about the 4-pawns attack, you can also check out my King's Indian series. We have more than 40 videos about the King's Indian defense from blacks and from white's perspective. We have seen also some theoretical improvements of this particular sideline. So as I said, please check it out. And if you want to see more brutal Stockfish games and some other top engine games, check out our common chess games played by computer series. Here's also a link of our playlist. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos. And what to say, chess is the best, of course.